It began quietly, too quietly for what was about to unfold. At 6:18 a.m., on a narrow service road skirting the forest belt west of Moscow, a Russian electronic warfare convoy slowed as it approached a junction. The vehicles carried Krasukha systems, advanced jammers designed to blind drones, sever communications, and protect the capital's outer shield. Routine movement, minimal alert posture, no sirens, no warning. Then the silence broke. Ukrainian FPV strike drones slipped in low, flying beneath radar coverage, hugging terrain, invisible until the final seconds. Each drone cost less than a used car. Their targets were not tanks or troops, but antennas, escort vehicles, and command links. One by one, the drones punched through soft points, tearing apart the convoy's electronic spine before defenses could even power up. Seconds later, autonomous ground robots followed. Small, tracked, unmanned. They dispersed smart mine strips across exit routes, sealing the corridor without direct engagement. No prolonged firefight, no wasted motion. Above it all, two Su-27 fighters swept the airspace. They didn't fire. They didn't need to. Their presence alone compressed Russian reaction time, grounding helicopters and freezing decision-making. This wasn't harassment. This was a precision disruption, layered, deliberate, and timed to the second. By 7:02 a.m., the engagement widened along the rail corridor northwest of Moscow. Russian forces surged to respond. An Orlan reconnaissance UAV climbed rapidly, feeding live video to a hastily assembled command post. On the ground, T-90M tanks rolled into blocking positions, turrets slewing toward suspected launch zones. Ukraine adjusted immediately. FPV loitering drones slipped beneath the Orlan's coverage, striking exposed sensors and forcing the UAV to withdraw. The Su-27s made another pass, again without firing, just enough to spike radar warnings and keep rotary assets grounded. That was the signal Ukraine wanted. Russian crews powered up S-300 air defense systems guarding the outskirts of Moscow. Each activation lit the electromagnetic spectrum. Each radar sweep revealed patterns, frequencies, and response timelines. The strike was never about destroying everything in sight. It was about forcing systems online. Within minutes, the rail line fell silent again. Russian units were deployed. Radars were active. Fuel movements halted. And Ukraine disengaged exactly on schedule. What remained was disruption, activated defenses, exposed patterns, and a clear message. Even Moscow's electronic shield could be compelled to react on Ukraine's terms. But Russia wasn't finished. As burning tank cars cast smoke across woodland and service roads, Panzer S-1 air defense vehicles deployed from hardened shelters. Radar masts snapped upright. Autocannons searched the sky. Krasukha systems powered up again, flooding the spectrum with aggressive jamming meant to sever Ukrainian control links. For most forces, this would have ended the operation. For Ukraine, it was expected. A second wave of drones arrived at extremely low altitude, terrain-masked, slipping through radar cones and electronic interference. Several struck support trucks and exposed sensors around the Panzer positions, forcing crews to divide attention between air defense and self-protection. Then Russia escalated. GPS spoofing surged. Drone feeds flickered. Navigation overlays twisted wildly. On Russian maps, Ukrainian drones appeared to drift thousands of miles away. But among the swarm were drones Moscow hadn't prepared for. Fiber-optic tethered UAVs. Each carried a hair-thin strand of glass fiber, spooling out behind it like an invisible lifeline. Through that strand flowed uncompressed video and control signals, immune to jamming, immune to spoofing. Radio waves could be flooded. Glass could not. As Russian jammers howled across the spectrum, these drones flew on untouched. To Russian sensors, they looked autonomous. In reality, Ukrainian pilots were flying them with perfect precision. The electronic duel was over. With Russian jamming neutralized, Ukraine unleashed the next phase. Su-27 flankers lined up at altitude, releasing unguided rockets toward reinforcements pushing in from the rear. Columns of fire and dirt erupted as armored trucks scattered. Almost simultaneously, HIMARS batteries fired from deep behind the lines, their GPS-guided rockets arcing toward a Russian supply depot feeding the rail corridor. Within minutes, the depot vanished. Secondary explosions rippled through storage bunkers. Ammunition cooked off. Fuel ignited. The message was unmistakable. No reinforcements. No resupply. No escape. What began as a stealthy ambush became a full-spectrum strike. FPV drones dove into stalled vehicles with pinpoint accuracy. Su-27 rocket runs pinned armor in place. HIMARS salvos thundered in the distance, cutting every logistical lifeline. In less than 10 minutes, the rail sector transformed into a burning cauldron. Smoke plumes rose thousands of feet into the air, visible for miles. This wasn't chaos. It was orchestration. Drones marked targets. Fighters suppressed movement. Long-range artillery sealed the perimeter. Each layer amplified the others. Russian troops found themselves trapped in a kill zone with no safe direction to flee. Attempts at counterattack collapsed under persistent drone pressure. Artillery fire was delayed and inaccurate, disrupted by damaged command links and constant electronic interference. Counter-battery radars never fully stabilized. As dawn approached, the battlefield settled into an uneasy lull. The rail line was severed. Electronic warfare vehicles were scattered or disabled. Air defense crews remained locked in a defensive posture against threats that no longer lingered. Ukrainian forces withdrew in stages, maintaining aerial observation but avoiding prolonged contact. The objective had already been achieved. This was not a decisive clash. It was a calculated disruption. Russian forces were forced to expose high-value systems, activate layered defenses, and halt logistics near their own capital. Ukraine held no ground and didn't need to, because modern warfare no longer rewards occupation. It rewards timing, coordination, control of the electromagnetic and aerial domains. Mass alone no longer guarantees dominance. And as smoke drifted over the shattered rail corridor west of Moscow, one truth lingered in the silence that followed. If Ukraine could force Moscow to react like this, then the next strike wouldn't need to be louder. It would only need to be smarter. The morning was quiet, too quiet for what was about to unfold along the rail corridor northwest of Moscow. A Russian convoy carrying advanced electronic warfare systems, including the Krasukha, moved slowly along service roads. Tanks rolled information, armored personnel carriers flanked the convoy, and radars scanned the horizon. On paper, Moscow's defenses looked impenetrable. In reality, they were about to be forced into a reaction they couldn't control. At 6:18 a.m., Ukrainian FPV strike drones slipped in low. They were small, cheap, each costing barely a fraction of the vehicles they targeted, but fast, precise, and deadly. Their first strikes hit the escort vehicles and antenna masts, disrupting the convoy's ability to coordinate. Seconds later, autonomous ground robots deployed smart mine strips across exits, sealing the corridor without direct confrontation. Overhead, two Su-27 fighters patrolled the skies, not to strike, but to compress Russian reaction time, keeping helicopters grounded and forcing air defenses to scramble. This was no random attack. It was a calculated ambush. Ukraine didn't seek to destroy every asset. It sought to force the enemy to reveal its hand. By 7:02 a.m., Russian forces had reacted. Orlan reconnaissance UAVs climbed, T-90M tanks advanced to block the rail spur, and Panzer S-1 air defense vehicles powered up. S-300 systems hummed to life. Moscow's electronic shield activated, just as Ukraine had planned. And then the second wave began. FPV loitering drones descended beneath radar coverage, striking sensors and support trucks. Russian crews scrambled, splitting focus between defending the convoy and protecting their electronic systems. Every move they made was anticipated, every reaction exploited. The battlefield shifted from steel to spectrum. Russian Krasukha and Panzer systems began jamming, pouring broadband interference across drone frequencies. GPS signals warped. Visual feeds flickered. Drones appeared miles away from their true position. But Ukraine had prepared for this. Among the swarm were fiber-optic tethered UAVs. Each carried a hair-thin reel of glass fiber, through which uncompressed video and control signals flowed. Jamming could disrupt radio waves, but glass could not. Russian operators' attempts to sever control were futile. With electronic defenses neutralized, Ukraine escalated. Su-27 fighters at high altitude released rockets on reinforcements approaching the corridor. HIMARS batteries launched GPS-guided rockets toward a key Russian supply depot. Explosions ripped through fuel tanks and ammunition stores, sending secondary blasts rolling across the rail corridor. Within minutes, what began as a stealthy ambush became a full-spectrum assault. Russian armored units were trapped in overlapping kill zones. Vehicles burned. Infantry scattered. The rail corridor, once a critical artery, became a flaming trap. The operation did not stop there. Ukraine's drones continued to mark targets while fighters suppressed movement. Artillery fired precision rounds into choke points. Every layer reinforced the next. Russian troops were forced to overextend, wasting time and exposing high-value systems. The fight escalated from rail corridors to the city itself. Ukrainian forces shifted their focus to Moscow's nerve centers. Drones and UGVs penetrated electronic defenses, disabling communications nodes, radar arrays, and fiber-optic relays. Abrams tanks and robotic units breached secondary perimeters, systematically dismantling Moscow's command capabilities. Inside the FSB's eastern wing, Ukrainian infantry infiltrated through maintenance tunnels abandoned since the 1980s. Moving silently beneath the city, they reached sub-level command nodes. Their mission was surgical: disable, extract, disrupt. No territory needed holding. No prolonged occupation required. Above ground, chaos compounded the effects. Russian armored vehicles were trapped by drone-marked kill zones and smart traffic disruptions. Autonomous routing failed, leading to a gridlock that immobilized over a dozen vehicles. This gave Ukrainian forces critical breathing room to execute their operation below and around the city. The combat inside the FSB was precise. Narrow hallways became killing corridors. Sappers breached steel doors silently. Leopards, small UGV robots carrying shaped charges, detonated near critical data racks. Every explosion, every movement was synchronized with drones overhead and artillery outside. Russian defenders were overwhelmed by smoke, noise, and confusion. Meanwhile, electromagnetic interference continued to wreak havoc. Moscow's airspace was no longer just physically contested, it was digitally contested. Signals flickered, AI targeting misidentified drones, and friendly fire incidents erupted due to corrupted IFF data. The chaos froze Russian command decisions in their tracks. Data destruction became unavoidable. Cybersecurity officers initiated emergency wipes of critical archives, erasing petabytes of intelligence, surveillance, and operational control. But Ukraine had already captured partial telemetry, gaining insight into foreign operations and high-value assets beyond Russia's borders. Outside, the city resembled a storm of steel and fire. Smoke columns towered above the skyline. Low-flying drones hovered over radar towers, antennas, and repeater nodes, forming a continuous observation net. Russian S-400 targeting radars were operational but hesitant. Every firing decision layered in caution after the friendly fire incident. Ukraine did not pause. AI-assisted targeting and decentralized decision-making rerouted Punisher drones mid-flight. Micro-UAVs acted as bait, mimicking tanks and UGVs, while real suicide drones struck critical nodes. Fiber relays, CCTV junctions, and mobile jammers fell one by one. Russian defenses scrambled but were constantly outmaneuvered. As the day progressed, the operation expanded into deliberate siege tactics. Air bases supplying the rail corridor were targeted next. JDAM precision bombs and artillery strikes destroyed fuel farms, bunkers, and surviving aircraft. Drones maintained control of airspace, sealing escape routes. Armored and mechanized units advanced through reinforced corridors, tightening the trap and leaving Russian forces with no options to regroup. By nightfall, what had begun as a chaotic drone ambush evolved into full-spectrum dominance. Supply lines severed, command networks disrupted, armored units trapped, and critical infrastructure destroyed. The battlefield stretched from forested rail corridors into Moscow's urban core, leaving the city disoriented and blind. Ukraine never intended to occupy. Their goal was far more strategic: control the tempo of battle, force the enemy into reaction, and sever the networks and logistics that enabled Moscow's operations. The aftermath was visible across the city and countryside. Burned vehicles, twisted rails, and destroyed depots marked every strike. Communications were fractured, command posts paralyzed, and above it all, Ukrainian drones hovered silently, watching, waiting, and preparing for the next wave. This wasn't just warfare. It was a new doctrine, a demonstration that modern conflict favors coordination, precision, and control of the electromagnetic and aerial domains over mass alone. And as the night fell over Moscow, one truth remained undeniable. Ukraine had forced the capital to react on their terms. The rail corridor had been neutralized, supply chains disrupted, Moscow's brain temporarily blinded. And the message was clear: victory no longer requires seizing cities. It requires cutting the right nodes at the right time and letting the chaos do the rest. In modern war, victory is no longer measured by the ground you occupy. It is measured by the systems you control, the signals you sever, the nerves you strike. At dawn, Ukrainian forces initiated a multi-layered operation that would redefine the battlefield west of Moscow. The target was clear: not entire armies, not cities, but the brain that allowed them to operate. The first phase began quietly. FPV strike drones, no larger than a small car, slipped into Russian defensive corridors. Low, fast, and invisible to early warning radars, they targeted antennas, support vehicles, and electronic warfare nodes. Autonomous ground robots followed, deploying smart mine strips across junctions, sealing exits without a single direct engagement. Above, Su-27 fighters patrolled. Their mission was psychological, not destructive. Their presence alone compressed Russian reaction times, grounding helicopters and forcing every radar mast to spin toward the threat. This was the first lesson. In modern warfare, the mind reacts before the body. By 7 a.m., Russian forces scrambled. T-90M tanks blocked critical routes. Orlan reconnaissance UAVs climbed, feeding live video to hastily established command posts. Panzer S-1 and S-300 air defense systems activated, flooding the electromagnetic spectrum. Moscow's defensive shield came online, precisely as Ukraine intended. The second wave arrived with surgical precision. FPV loitering drones used terrain masking to bypass radar cones, striking sensors, and support vehicles. Russian crews split attention between defending their convoys and protecting electronic nodes. Every decision was a reaction to Ukrainian initiative. Then the electronic duel escalated. Russian jammers surged across multiple frequencies, GPS signals warped, and drone video feeds flickered. Ukrainian operators anticipated the move. Among the swarm were fiber-optic tethered drones, connected by hair-thin strands of glass fiber. Immune to jamming, they transmitted uncompressed video and control signals. Russian Krasukha systems, worth millions, were rendered ineffective. With the electronic shield neutralized, Ukraine escalated further. Su-27 fighters released rockets on reinforcements, HIMARS batteries destroyed supply depots, and coordinated drone strikes pinned armored units in overlapping kill zones. The rail corridor burned. Fuel tanks erupted. Ammunition bunkers detonated. The message was unmistakable: no reinforcements, no escape. But Ukraine's doctrine was clear. Victory comes not from destruction alone, but from control. Every strike, every movement was orchestrated to force Russian systems into exposure. Command posts lit up like beacons. Electronic warfare arrays overextended. Logistics halted. Moscow was reacting on Ukraine's timetable. The operation shifted from the rail corridors to urban terrain. Drones, UGVs, and armored units advanced toward Moscow's FSB and secondary command nodes. Abrams tanks pushed through smoke screens. Robotic units breached security zones. Electronic warfare created a digital fog, scrambling signals, corrupting telemetry, and sowing confusion. Inside the FSB's eastern wing, Ukrainian infantry infiltrated abandoned maintenance tunnels, reaching sublevel command nodes. Their objective: disable, extract, and disrupt. No territory needed holding. No prolonged occupation required. The mission was surgical. Above ground, chaos compounded. Russian armored columns were trapped by smart traffic jams, micro-UAV bait, and layered kill zones. Autonomous routing failed. Vehicles gridlocked. Russian forces were paralyzed in place while Ukrainian forces executed operations with clockwork precision below and around them. Combat inside the FSB was controlled and deliberate. Narrow hallways became kill corridors. Sappers breached steel doors silently. Leopards, robotic UGVs with shaped charges, detonated near critical data racks. Smoke and sparks filled the corridors. Russian defenders fired blindly, hitting nothing but the void. Electromagnetic interference transformed Moscow's airspace into a minefield. Signals flickered, AI misidentified targets, and friendly fire incidents erupted. Russian command could no longer trust its systems. Decisions slowed. Reaction times stretched from milliseconds to seconds, a lifetime in electronic warfare. A full-scale cyber purge began. Russian operators initiated emergency wipes of critical archives, destroying petabytes of intelligence, surveillance, and operational files. But Ukraine had already intercepted partial data, gaining insight into foreign operations, supply routes, and hidden assets. What the Russians lost was not just information, it was control. Outside, the city became a stage for synchronized multi-domain operations. Low-flying drones hovered over radar towers, antennas, and repeater nodes, maintaining observation. Su-25 and Su-34 strike jets attempted to respond but were misled by decoy UAVs mimicking tanks and armored vehicles. Every Russian response played into the Ukrainian plan. Precision strikes extended to key logistical hubs. Fuel farms, ammunition depots, and runways were destroyed. Armored columns were corralled, leaving them vulnerable to artillery and drone attacks. Every target chosen amplified the effect of the others. Each layer worked in tandem, turning chaos into controlled destruction. Ukraine did not hold the ground. Instead, they severed Moscow's lifelines. Command networks were blinded. Surveillance systems were paralyzed. Critical nodes were destroyed or compromised. The city's brain, the systems that allowed it to operate, was effectively cut. By nightfall, the operation was complete. Rail lines severed. Supply chains destroyed. Russian forces trapped and paralyzed. Drones hovered silently over key nodes, waiting for the next trigger. Ground units extracted wounded, both Russian and Ukrainian, maintaining control without chaos. This was the new doctrine of warfare, cutting the brain, not the land. Victory was measured in control, not occupation. Timing, coordination, and dominance over electromagnetic, aerial, and cyber domains outweighed sheer mass. The battlefield had evolved. It was no longer defined by who held the terrain. It was defined by who controlled the signals, who dictated the tempo, and who forced the enemy to react on their terms. And in the quiet that followed, one thing was clear. Ukraine had rewritten the rules of engagement. Moscow had been forced to respond, paralyzed by precision, outmaneuvered in both the digital and physical spheres. Modern warfare had a new truth. Control the brain and the body will follow.